Everybody, wait a minute. Everybody, wait a minute. I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like.
Hey, 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 what's up, world? Welcome to another edition of I Mix What I Like, right here at I Mix What I Like. Please come on in. Again, I'm Jared Ball, happy to be your host. And before we get started, do all the things that I think everybody knows to do. And thank you very much. Thank you all for joining me here. I'm just checking trying this new setup over here. But anyway, welcome everybody. Good to see you all. Thank you for joining me here again today. Like, share, subscribe, all of those things, and let's get into it. Let's get into it, and I'll check back. Well, actually, now that I can see it right here, we can. Although I don't know if you can highlight chats on this one, so I'm trying out this restream thing. We're trying this out after the other day's debacle. But yeah, so I did want to take a chance to look back at Socialist Reconstruction from the Party for Socialism and Liberation. The link to the first 4 chapter reviews is in the show description, and so feel free to check those out. And very much enjoying my slow-paced read. I came back to the book because the question as it relates to buying power and its promotion to Black communities in particular often associates with the issue of land. And one of the things we often hear is that Black people should be investing in a number of different things. Nowadays it's crypto, but land has always been one of them. So, and I've had a number of different issues with that. So when I saw that chapter 5 deals with the question of land, I thought, let me just check it out and advance this, again, slow-paced review. And I'm glad I did, because they not only speak to a socialist vision for land, but specifically to the history of the theft of land from Black people here in the United States. So I did, let's see, in my notes here, I've said that, first of all, big shout out to the late great Baba Tariq Oduno, who many in the Pan-African community in this country will and beyond will have had the pleasure of having met. Certainly those of us in the DC area, and we know among the few of the few things he was most known for was, of course, not only his height and his abiding defense of Garvey, but his point that there is no culture without agriculture. And he was always quick to point right back to the issue of land and its, in particular, special relationship to African people and people, obviously, everywhere. And this chapter outlines the importance of land ownership to food production, earth conservation, and social relations, the role government plays today in maintaining a capitalist profit-driven model, and just how a socialist government provides much of the corrective measures necessary. So that's the overall summary, and I will let's bring this up here. Reconstructing Agriculture is the title of the chapter. And obviously, we're not going to read the entire thing. I do encourage people to check the book. And again, my primary reason for it is, of course, I'm interested in socialism, but I'm also interested in how to think logically about the world in which we live right now and how we would move logically, philosophically, and literally to another stage. And this book, I think, is very helpful in explaining where we are and then how we can move to something else. I've also argued, and I agree again, that even if the context is not an integrated socialist United States and the context becomes an actual Black nationalist or a variation of African nationalisms around the globe, that there still needs to be this kind of socialist organization of that society just as well, just the same. Again, also with the idea of starting where we are right now, not anywhere else. So, in my humble way, this is there is no unnecessary contradiction uh, in considering this. It's not even a recruitment, nor could it be for me to join the PSL. So, as they say here, the capitalist system controls food production in the interest of private wealth accumulation. And again, as they've done chapter after chapter, I really like how they make this point very clear that despite mythologies, despite the narratives that have been intentionally evolved to the opposite, the reality is that those in power know that they need government to give the rule of law overlay, the public policy legitimacy, the element, and of course, the ability to mobilize a military with a near monopoly of violence. That government is necessary for that. Some form of organization is necessary for that, and or at least is what operates in defense of a capitalist accumulation of private wealth. So whenever they're talking about small government or whenever they're talking about some libertarian, all of that is a fantasy that to the extent it avoids, and often it totally avoids this point. And as they say here, a striking symbol of this control is the largest owner of agricultural land in the US, billionaire Bill Gates. And although no one would mistake the founder of the Microsoft Corporation for a farmer, Gates owned close to 270,000 acres of farmland in 19 states. Through his Alliance for a Green Revolution in Africa, Gates is pushing reliance on chemicals and commercial seeds onto African farmers. Agricultural production under capitalism isn't organized to care for humans, animals, communities, or the environment. It's dominated by enormous multinational corporations that traffic and bioengineer seeds, pesticides, and machinery. Again, what I like about what they do here is that it takes everything out of the mysticism of conspiracy that Bill Gates and others are on. No. It's not to deny that the ruling elite are doing this, but it is to put it back into some sort of material, logical way that demystifies the reality so that we can maybe organize it out of existence. So that is, we don't need to look at Bill Gates as some mystical Illuminati, whatever kind of figure. He is a billionaire doing what billionaires do, building off of the wealth they've already exploited off of others and looking to conquer other areas. The best way, I think, to logically address ourselves to it, however we approach ourselves to the conspiracy, is in this way: to think about what kind of society we would want, how it should be organized, and then to begin to build towards that struggle. The chapter talks about the harm that this capitalist organization of agriculture and farmland has on health. 40% of Americans suffer from health conditions related to the poor quality of the food we eat. Our diets are wash in sugars, fats, chemicals, and processed food. Or like the people in Flint, Michigan, just, straight up, I mean, those chemicals are just straight up put there and ignored in favor of other forms of capitalist exploitation. Food production in the U.S. is high yield, low nutrient, carbon intensive, and ecologically damaging. The agricultural sector is organized so that food giants control the entire chain of production from farm to fork. They dictate the composition of crops, genetic engineering of seeds, composition and use of fertilizers and pesticides, technologies for harvest and slaughter, as well as the branding, marketing, packing, and distribution of food. 75% of the global ecological damage, as well as 40% of greenhouse gas emissions, stem from industrial agriculture. That says a lot on almost everything that immediately needs to be said and understood about this system. From the harm that it generates in terms of the quality of the food. And of course, what I appreciate that they include is this issue of branding and marketing. And I would argue it's not just branding and marketing a specific food item. And I've said this for a long time, that I think if we understand the psychological warfare element, if we understand the context of counterinsurgency, then, and even in terms of what has been written about it in terms of advertising, I think that if we have to understand that they're not just advertising a particular brand or hamburger or car or tennis shoe, it's marketing and advertising in favor of the existence of that form of social relation, that form of mass production and consumption of whatever the commodity is, and the labor and social relations that is forced in there. So and I keep going back to even after 9/11, when George Bush goes on TV and tells everybody to go back to shopping and go back on vacation and don't let the terrorists win. That's in part what they were doing with the commercial breaks in between, sort of putting in the that which holds the cement to get, what is it that holds the concrete bricks together? That the consumption, the shopping, the travel is what drives the economy. It is what saves capitalism. It is what generates the wealth, so on, for those who rule. So the commercials are not just commercials for those products, they're commercials for that life. They put it here in the context of imperialism, saying that corporate agriculture extends beyond the borders of the United States. It's a weapon in the arsenal of US imperialism. And they talk about the process in greater detail, obviously, than I'll get to here and explain it, but how overproduction as a necessity of capitalism to manipulate stock and the cost of whatever it is that's being, whatever commodity, also results in, for instance, dumping of mass amounts of grain or some other commodity onto another country, forcing them into monoculture, monocropping, growing one or another crop to satisfy the market as dictated by the United States. And it just messes everything up. So under socialism, land will be nationalized. All of this will be organized so that the cancer, as they call it, of overproduction can be taken care of. And to, of course, explain that cancer, here enter African people. Where few, not none, but few would provide a better example of how capitalism, as in its relationship, and imperialism in its relationship to agriculture impacts the community. The story of American technological know-how erases the history of industrial agriculture and colonialism and slavery. And I really like the point that they make here. I had never heard of Eric Holt Jimenez, so I'm glad to be introduced to the work, explains that, quote, West Africans were experts at sophisticated forms of floodplain and tidal irrigation and adept at the difficult and arduous process of hand milling. Rice producing slaves were initially able to exchange knowledge of rice cultivation for land. Once the plantation owners learned the techniques, the exchange came to an end. The knowledge plantation owners gained from the enslaved workers became a basis for their enslavement of others. Similarly, erased from the fairy tale of American farming is the systematic oppression of free Black farmers. So the whole thing, from the abuse of land, of labor, the know-how, the technological skill, all of that is turned into, as this chapter is wanting to make the point, to the process of exploitation and suffering. In the socialist takeover, the argument becomes the know-how, the skill, all that has been learned, certainly by today, of the best farming techniques will be put to what the planet and people need, as opposed to what is necessary for the most profit. In 1910, Black farmers owned between 16 and 19 million acres of land. Over the next 100 years, anti-Black discrimination and capitalist predation expropriated 90% of it. In fact, let me bring something up before we come back to that. Because I'm sure at least some of you have seen this, but just to get an idea of what we're talking about, that adds to a little bit to what the chapter there was just getting into. Black Land Theft and the Racial Wealth Divide by Takisa Nesbitt. Forgive me if I'm mispronouncing that. And the link to this will be in the show description. No, I don't think I put it there already. At the beginning of the 20th century, African Americans owned at least 14 million acres of land. By the 21st century, 90% of land had been stolen from them. Now African Americans only own 1.1 million acres of farmland and are part owners of another 1.7 million acres. Across a century, white farmers and landowners developed multiple ways to take African Americans' land using methods such as heirs, property, tax sales, and Torrens Acts. No mention of vigilante violence, or not, certainly not a focus on it, but I would want to throw that in there as well. To understand the magnitude of this land theft, one must examine the extreme measures taken by those who captured the land from African American landowners. A lot of it they talked about to scheme, and they talk about manipulating heirs of land to put families against one another, create little loopholes so that you don't need all the heirs sign off on the sale of a property. It's to preying on family miscommunication to take control of land. The Torrens Act was based off of the Torrens system, which was first used in 1858 in Australia, which makes perfect sense. Talk about land theft on a grand scale. It was developed by Sir Robert Torrens for the purpose of enhancing the certainty of title to land and to simplify dealings involving land. And it became a loophole to remove families from their property through partition sales. In Mississippi alone, land stolen from 1950 to 1964 totaled 800,000 acres. So it's only 16 years in one state. 800,000 acres. A research team calculated the value of the stolen land in Mississippi to be between $3.7 to $6.6 billion in today's dollars. And these estimates of white wealth extraction from African Americans through land theft are of just this one state. Now, I don't know why they go into home ownership here that is a separate issue from land ownership. But I wanted to share those numbers real quick. And then just by way of update in terms of what's going on here in the United States, where, so remember that previous articles said Black people here in the United States own 1.1 million acres of farmland and are part owners of 1.7 million acres all told. So if we're just generous and say that's 2.2 million acres of farmland owned in this country, of land total, 2.2 million acres of land total owned by Black people in the United States, and look at the top 100 landowners in the United States, we see that 2.2 million acres doesn't even total what the Emerson family in California owns by themselves. It doesn't amount to the 2.2 million owned by John Malone, the real founder of BET, by the way. You know what? I do need to double check that. Is that the same John Malone? I think that is. It might not be. It may not be. Let me double check that. I'll double check that and check. But whoever it is, it's not. Maybe that's not the same John Malone. Ted Turner. All Black people combined own just a little bit more than Ted Turner. Stan Kroenke, the Reed family have 1.6. So this is always part of my point, that when people are saying Black people should invest in land and buy land, what land? And the book chapter mentioned Bill Gates. He's not even in the top 10. Where's Bill Gates in the top? Where's Gates? Not in the top 20. Bezos is 25. Where did I miss Gates? He's not in the top 30. I must have missed the Gates Foundation. He's got to be in the top 40. I'm sure I missed it. Nope, 42. But that's just the United States. That's not Africa. So the point being, the land is gobbled up. The land, much like everything else we're told we're supposed to invest in, it's accumulated already. So I just wanted to show that little bit there. Coming back here to the book, they talk about, again, a key turning point after the Second World War, where industrial farming took off in the United States, and the economy reconverted from its wartime mobilization. Chemical production shifted over to fertilizers and pesticides. In fact, most of the pesticides used today contain the same nerve poisons that were used in Nazi gas chambers. That's wow. And as I mentioned, the U.S. dumped surplus onto countries in the global South, driving prices down, destroying domestic products, eliminating these countries' capacities to feed themselves. And as biologist Rob Wallace says, agribusiness is so focused on profits that selecting for a virus that might kill 1 billion people is treated as a worthy risk. So they talk a little bit about how all of this, including industrial meat production, impacts the likelihood of a pandemic, how it exacerbated the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. And as they say here, market-driven overproduction, economic immiseration, megacities, slums, degenerated healthcare, and the global movement of people and products turned viruses into pandemics. COVID-19 was not the first pandemic. And then I just asked here in my notes, why is the food system not the favored subject of conspiracy? I mean, again, the realities are bad enough before you get into anything that may or may not be proven. The working class is stuffed with junk food. They talk, I mean, a lot of, they don't necessarily talk about food deserts, but it's the system that would certainly produce them. Uh, and they talk about how racism in the Southern Democrats destroyed any potential good that might have come to this after the New Deal passed by Franklin Roosevelt. And they say here, overproduction is not the only story of capitalist markets. It's a story of state intervention. Policy. Yeah, I just wanted to note policy. That, in other words, that they do this. This is all a matter of public policy. That would be why we would want to have political power as opposed to this fantasy of being able to catch up economically. They talk about land nationalization and how Marx said that nationalization of land would work. Nationalization of land will work a complete change in the relations between labor and capital and finally do away with the capitalist form of production, whether industrial or rural. This is an essential step to get rid of the major players: Archer Daniels Midland, Dow DuPont, Cargill, Tyson, Walmart, and others. Get rid of those big, large-scale productions and redistribute to smaller ones. They even say in the chapter that certainly initially smaller farmers and producers their lives wouldn't change much, except in they wouldn't have to do any of the silly things uh, like be paid not to produce or overproduce to warehouse or whatever. They would be paid, and actually it seems like paid more, because they would get more out of the return from the wealth and the resources they produce, because it wouldn't all be going to feed the billionaires that run these major companies. One thing that they put in here that I think is important is they talk about the Central Land Bureau. So they talk about, again, to the point I was making earlier, how this would actually happen. You create a bureau, you create an office who would be in charge of nationalizing the land. The Central Land Bureau would be the umbrella agency for coordinating food production, forest and grassland regeneration, coastal and wetland protection, watersheds and water use oversight, and so on. And they talk about the Department of Food Production. In other words, they talk about a structure that would allow for this to occur and that would manage all of the knowledge and know-how that exists, so that what we need would be produced. What would be produced would not be for profit, but for human need and for the regeneration of the planet. Socialist agriculture will be anti-imperialist agriculture. It will abolish the overproduction behind the aggressive dumping of surplus crops onto the global south. Much of socialism will build from the achievements of capitalism. In agriculture, social reconstruction will also build from non-capitalist achievements, from practices and forms of knowledge that capitalism has generally expropriated, exploited, and eliminated. Climate change, as well as the soil depleting and soul destroying effects of capitalist agriculture, require us to dismantle the imperialist agriculture industrial complex and replace capitalism's profit motive with care for people and planet. We have a world to win. So they talk about, yeah, and again, they talk about bringing in indigenous knowledge. They talk about how when people are not being forced to toil in most abusive conditions to work the land, that it would create all new forms of social organization. If people aren't being overworked to produce an overproduction meant to destroy the economies of people in this country and overseas, then it changes. So again, I don't claim to perfectly understand it. I don't claim that it would be perfect by any means, but I like the way it's all that these elements are incorporated in their discussion. That is that there will be an impact. There is an intended impact to be had in terms of how people relate to one another. To take And it's funny. I was just watching something on one of the atheist debates channels, and they were talking about the Bible and its defense of enslavement. And one of the arguments that one of the linguists was making was that the language, because they were responding to something about somebody was making a sports analogy in trying to defend ownership of human beings. And I'm sorry, not a linguist, a philologist. The history of languages, especially through the lens of literature, it says here on Google. But that the language we have adopted today that has been imposed on us today in sports was evolved through the hostile relationships, the hostile labor relationships, including slavery of the past. So that's why we do hear all this stuff about owners and buying and selling players and all of this other kind of stuff. So the argument, as I understand it in this chapter and throughout the book, is that, and as Marx and Engels and others have been saying, is that socialism would change the social relationships. Part of the material relationships is what determines the social. So so that's it. That's it. And I just wanted to revisit that, and I'm glad I did, because it will help inform this work I'm still trying to put together, and just in general to respond to these arguments about what Black people should do, among others, to get out of the situation we're in. And it's not it's not something that can be done through individual it's not a mindset, and it can't be done through let's get our money right, and it can't be through investment, is really what I was trying to figure out. So all right, let me see, let's try this thing here real quick. Are there any questions or comments, queries, conundrums, catechisms, cacophony, calumny, consternation, contemplation, condemnation? And if not, we can just wrap it up there. And I appreciate everybody for coming through. Better call ball. So, all right, cool. You know what? Let me show this. Let me try this here. I do like that they have this option. If anybody wants to get the myth and propaganda of Black buying power, you can just scan that QR code if you haven't gotten a copy and check it out. Because it is actually in there that some of that's what I was sort of talking about, this return of all right. Oh, culture. All right. I don't know. What are I don't think so. What are CLTs? Does the chapter go into CLTs? I don't know. What is a CLT? Put that back in there. And if you see up here, you can also use a QR code to join iMix What I Like, or to join the channel here. This is kind of slick. This is kind of slick. This is kind of slick. Oh, and is it telling me how many people are doing it? Oh, wow. Okay. Let me. So Culture 88, what were you? Oh, Community Land Trust. No. I didn't see anything about that in here. And I'm not sure. I'm wrong. They did. Well, they mentioned it in passing. They highlight promising models of social housing already present under capitalism. And they mention community land trusts along with tenant cooperatives, mission-driven nonprofits, and well-functioning public housing. These experiments in social housing can inspire a housing framework for the future. They point to an array of different models, different options communities can employ as they work collectively to make sure that everyone has a safe and reliable housing that meets their needs. But it's not in this chapter. So what chapter is this in? It is in... Oh, it's in chapter 6. So when we reconvene to talk about the next chapter, we'll get to that. But they just mentioned it one time in passing. Thank you for asking, Brittany. I get a royalty on... You know what? I don't remember exactly how it works. I get a royalty on hard copy sales. I don't think I get royalty on digital sales. I think it's something like that. I don't think it. Yeah. I think that's how the contract is written. So I get I don't even remember what the percentage is, but it's a relatively small percentage. Whatever's I don't think it's an inappropriately low, but I honestly, in other words, I don't think it's substandard. But I think it's sort of a standard regular person royalty and something like that. Yeah. But I did like how they have this as an option on Restream, so I just thought I would check it out. And more importantly than whether I get money is that if people want the book, I want people to get the book. So you know. But I do appreciate the question. Exactly. Don't forget I have to pay Kamal too, you know. Because Brooklyn is, you know what I mean, Brooklyn. Oh yeah. I would, you know, I generally, to the extent possible, certainly in public advocacy, we try to avoid Amazon. So the link in the QR code takes you directly to the publisher's website. That much I know. Yeah, so, but all right, good people. I appreciate you all coming through. I appreciate you all considering joining, getting the book, supporting the platform, all of those things, and joining this slow motion review and discussion of Socialist Reconstruction. And look forward to doing a few more as I eventually go through the rest of this book. But all right, everybody. Thanks for coming through once again. As usual, peace only if you're willing to fight for it, as Fred Hampton used to say. And I will catch you next time right here on
I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like.
And what do you sacrifice?
Calm, kindness, kinship, love. I've given up all chance at inner peace. I made my mind a sunless space. I share my dreams with ghosts. I wake up every day to an equation I wrote 15 years ago for which there's only one conclusion. I'm damned for what I do. My anger anger, my ego, my unwillingness to yield, my eagerness to fight, that set me on a path from which there's no escape. I yearn to be a savior against injustice without contemplating the cost, and by the time I look down, there's no longer any ground beneath my feet. What is my sacrifice? I'm condemned to use the tools of my enemy to defeat them. I burn my decency for someone else's future. I burn my life to make a sunrise that I know I'll never see. Now, the ego that started this fight will never have a mirror or an audience or the light of gratitude. So what do I sacrifice? Everything.
I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like.